You've probably heard of the Fertile Crescent, that relatively moist area in the otherwise arid Middle East. The water and soil in that region allowed some of mankind's earliest civilizations to flourish, so we sometimes call it the Cradle of Civilization. Well, the hand that rocked that cradle wasn't always gentle. That's what's up next on PS 100. It's funny how many natural forces that we depend on can kill us. This is a hard fact of life that the ancient Egyptians had to live with. They depended on the Nile to water and fertilize their crops, but thanks to the unpredictability of the hydrologic or water cycle, sometimes the Nile brought deadly famine instead. The faster a river flows, the more sediment it can erode from its banks and carry downstream, and it won't drop that sediment until the current slows down. The Nile is big enough and fast enough to pick up a lot of sediment on its way to the sea. But before it reaches the Mediterranean, it passes through the Nile River floodplain. Historically, when the rainy season caused the river to rise beyond its banks, it spread out as a slow-moving sheet across the floodplain and just dropped all the nutrient-rich soil right there. This happened every year, and when the flood receded, it left behind enough fertile farmland to create agricultural abundance, make the division of labor possible, and open the door for advanced civilization. But the floods weren't always predictable, and if the floodwaters remained too high for too long, the ancient Egyptians couldn't get a crop in, and famine ensued. Similarly, the Mississippi River has seen its fair share of devastation. And though we've tried to tame the mighty Mississippi with levees for 100 years, entire communities have been swept off the map. Most recently, we have the tragic flooding of New Orleans in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. But the most severe flood on record didn't begin with a hurricane. It began with an awful lot of ordinary rain, and ultimately became the Great Mississippi Flood of 1927. The flood of 1927 submerged roughly 27,000 square miles under as much as 30 feet of floodwater, affecting over 600,000 people across 10 states. Right about now, you're probably thinking, boy, I'm glad I don't live near a major river or a floodplain. But even if you live in the desert, there are other ways that the hydrologic cycle could affect your life. You might live near or even on an alluvial fan, for instance. What is an alluvial fan? Well, when rain falls on a mountain, that water creates streams that can carry sediment, vegetation, and even large boulders. When those streams hit the foothills and valley floor, they slow down and fan out, dropping the sediment in the process. You'll find substantial alluvial fans in Los Angeles, San Bernardino, Las Vegas, Salt Lake City, Denver, and even Provo. Rock Canyon Park is actually a flood basin built to protect everything we've built on the alluvial fan below, including hundreds of homes, the Provo Temple, the MTC, and even part of BYU's campus. Sure, we're getting pretty good at protecting ourselves from the hydrologic cycle, but we're not so big Mother Nature couldn't spank us again. And what we've done to bend the hydrologic systems to our will often creates whole new disasters for us to prevent, like the one the Egyptians face on the Nile Delta thanks to the Aswan High Dam. The dam doesn't just hold back water, it holds back the fertile soil Egypt was built on. Egyptian farmers are now dependent on chemical fertilizers, which is unfortunate, but that's not the biggest crisis. Thanks to the Aswan High Dam, the Nile River Delta is being swallowed up by the sea. The current loses nearly all of its momentum when it hits the sea, so sediment piles up and settles much like an alluvial fan. That's how deltas are formed. But unlike an alluvial fan, this deposit of sediment recedes as it is constantly washed away by sea currents or compacted down. Since we've dammed that sediment far upstream, the delta coastline recedes close to 100 meters per year in some places. That's pretty bad news for Egyptians. 2/3 of the population live on the delta and 60% of their food is grown there. And we've got a similar problem in the Mississippi Delta, which is losing the equivalent of a football field of wetland to the open water every hour. So to date, Louisiana has lost around 1,900 square miles of land. To put that into perspective, imagine the entire state of Delaware sank into the ocean. Well, that was depressing. If you need a pick-me-up, check out the videos in the description below and be sure to drop by science.byu.edu to learn more about studying math and physical science at BYU.